Hello, I'm Tanuja and I'm an Avanti fellow. I'm 17 years old and I'm currently studying in JNV Bangalore Rural. I love studying biology and I want to become a doctor. Welcome to Avanti, a show where incredible women who are at the top of their fields share the obstacles they had to overcome to get there. Here is our host, Vandana Goyal.
Growing up in Calcutta, Gayatri Shenai didn't need to look too far to find role models. They were in her own home. Watching her mother go to work at a time when it was quite uncommon for women instilled in Gayatri the importance of being independent and standing out instead of fitting in. Gayatri would carry the same attitude to Manipal Institute of Technology, where she got her bachelor's in engineering. In spite of being ignored and shut down in a male-dominated classroom, Gayatri continued to voice her opinions. Today, those same opinions are coveted by the international companies that Gayatri advises in her role as senior partner at McKinsey Company. For her work championing women in the workplace, Gayatri also co-founded the McKinsey Women in Technology and Operations Conference, which brings together the most influential female technology executives in North America. Thank you so much for joining us, Gayatri.
My pleasure.
Such a pleasure. I'm so excited to talk to you and to share with our audience all of your amazing stories. So we're going to start from a very early age. Your mother works a full-time job when she had both you and your brother. Your grandmother was married off at the age of 24, and then your grandfather passed away at an early age himself. Your mother grew up as the seventh child in her family. So the women in your family clearly come from some tough stock, and they had to work really hard to provide for their children. How did this impact you growing up?
My grandmother was married at the age of 14, not 24. And she was probably one of the strongest women in my early days growing up. In a large family of 7 kids and multiple adults and many cousins, she stood out as someone who was caring. She stood out as someone who was strong. And she stood out as someone who, despite having had lost her husband very early in her life also, was able to take care of such a large family. And my mom, after her marriage, moved to Calcutta, very far away from what was her home and her family, given my dad's job. And in that, my mom had us, and I say us as if everybody will know who us is, but it's my brother and me, we are twins. And my mom had the two of us when she was 22, so really early in her life. And at a time where she had little family support, and my mom had a choice to, or probably no choice, to raise us and continue working in the workforce. And she sought to do that with help from the outside in terms of a person who would come in and help out during the day while she was out at work. She's been an important role model in my journey right from day one, as someone who's instilled in me the importance of self-reliance, financial independence, and finding a way to find your own purpose in life, in how you give to society, how you contribute to the communities you live in, and become bigger, become productive in ways that allow you to find meaning in life.
One of the things that I found fascinating while talking to you is the obstacles your mother faced as a working woman at that time in India, and some of the resistance also and judgment she faced for having help from the outside to take care of her children. Can you speak a little bit about some of the struggles, societal or otherwise, that she faced in making those choices?
Growing up, my almost daily question to my mom used to be, why are you working? Why can't you be like my other friends' moms who stay at home, take care of their kids, and is always available. And I asked that of her a lot, primarily because of what I was hearing from my friends and from people around me. And I think my mom herself shielded us from it, but I know she would have faced those same questions, the same judgment around, look at this lady, she's prioritizing work over kids. So these were constant chatter around us. And now I'm again describing an India into the 1970s and 80s when it was a lot less prevalent for women to be in the workplace. They were almost always judged as people who probably had husbands who didn't make enough, or their husbands financially could not guarantee security and a lifestyle for the household. And it was frowned on for women to show up to the workplace. In that context, my mom always stood out and stood up for what she believed in. She didn't work only because she needed to, she worked because she chose to. And these are different, in my opinion. Yes, does the money help? Yes. Does the financial independence help? Yes. But it was a choice, and the choice was hers to make. And she chose to do that despite the societal pressures, despite the chatter around her, despite the lack of support, perceived and real. And this, to me, again, is an important lesson in life. It is standing up for your morals, your values, what you believe in, and not looking for external validation. By the way, my mom's job was working in a bank, and she was a clerk. But being a clerk, she took a lot of pride in the customer service she was providing, from small businesses that she was making a difference to in providing loans, to day-to-day laborers who came to deposit their daily earnings in the spirit of building a savings. She helped them all, and that was her pride. That was her objective of getting up in the morning and leaving her kids behind to go to work. And I think that whole thing around finding purpose, finding meaning, staying true to your roots, and standing up for what you believe in, these are important pillars of lessons and just pillars of being who we each are as individuals that she imbibed in us.
And because you had her as an example, do you think it changed your own expectations of what you would do in the future, what you could do in the future? And if so, how?
Yeah, for sure. I would say I'm very lucky to have had her as a role model. The biggest thing it gave me was the belief that I could do anything I chose to. It came to choices I would need to make, but those were my choices. And I didn't need to listen to society. I didn't need to listen to, as long as I did things that were right, morally right, legally right, I didn't need others to decide for me what life I would lead.
One of the choices that you made is to pursue engineering. Why did you choose that?
I am a hardcore problem solver at heart. So love solving crosswords. I love solving jigsaw puzzles. My earliest memories of growing up is with my dad. We used to disassemble toaster ovens and those small portable heaters.
Were you ever able to put them back, or?
No, never. They almost always were not working for us to have explored opening it up and disassemble it, but we never put them back. We never repaired them. We never made it work. So my mom will say single-handedly we've been the most destructive.
Her hard-earned money.
But look, I think this innate curiosity everyone has, whether it's engineers or even doctors, to me are in some way, I think engineering is the basic, like English is, or like alphabets are rather to English. To me, engineering is to every profession, because when I think about medical professionals, what do? It's pattern matching. It's learning what patterns you're seeing and trying to narrow it to a root cause or to what's causing it. So same as with engineering, it's about finding patterns, finding how do you take a complex problem, break it down into smaller pieces, and then get down to the basics of how a capacitor works or how a transistor works. Everybody who has an innate curiosity to learn something new, to wanting to explore and understand the why. When I think about kids I see around us, the first question they are asking is why, right? Why is it this way? Every one of us has that quality. And if you have that in you, where you're asking yourself whys and you're curious to understand and learn that, then to me, engineering is that profession that tries to make sense out of it. It's science, it's math, it's physics all coming together. That's one of the core reasons I chose to do engineering.
And you chose to go to Manipal from West Bengal. And your mom, as progressive as she was for the time, is still an Indian mom who doesn't want her kids to go far away. But you also had the courage to actually leave home, go far away, because something about that choice mattered to you. Can you share a little bit about why that was important for you to leave home?
So I had a couple of options. I had an option to join a engineering college in Calcutta. And then I had the option to go join an engineering college in Manipal. And so I think a bit of that was my mom's question as to, you have something here, why do you need to go that far? And it's a very valid question. I think I asked myself that multiple times too, because I'm very close with my family. Ultimately, I chose to leave. Now, if you ask me why, I would say there were a couple of reasons. One was just more professional, which is when I compared the two colleges, I did think Manipal gave me a lot more in terms of where I wanted to head in my next steps. So professionally, what I wanted to do, the diversification, the need to get to know more people from across geographies, that was a lot more possible in Manipal than the local college. I think the personal reason to me was I had always grown up in a close-knit family, very protected, very supported. Like I described, we grew up in Calcutta, far away from the rest of my relatives. So my parents showed up in meaningful ways as our support structure. And it was necessary for me to fly out the nest to know I could fly on my own. And I knew they wouldn't be too far away, but that need for independence, that need for learning to make my own choices, not have their help for every second of it, was equally important. And I'm glad I did it. Like I will say, I was miserable in Manipal. I had a lot of friends. I learned a lot. It was a great place to go. All of that is true. But I was also homesick. I missed my family. It was not easy. But in hindsight, if you said, would you do it again? I would say absolutely. It was the turning point of my life.
And when you were at Manipal, I think 20% or less of your class was young women.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that like?
This was again in the late 90s. So, yes, in Manipal, we were a very small, there were two classes, two sections for computer science electronics graduates. We had two benches.
A special row.
Of special row. The first two benches were women, and the rest were all the rest were all boys.
What was that experience like?
So it was good and bad. The good was we grew up as a sisterhood. It was a small group. We knew each other. We supported each other. We helped each other. I had many friends, but one of my friends was Rashmi, and she would be my partner in crime in preparing for exams and vivas. She would role play the professor, ask me hard questions, help me with notes when I missed out on particular classes and things like that. And she had an instrumental role in helping me be who I am. And I think I had the same in with a couple of others. So we helped each other out in ways that I would encourage. And by the way, has been a part of who I am now, and we'll talk a bit more about it. But I would encourage the people listening to find ways to form a sisterhood and help each other out. We often think of others as competitors, and it's not. There's enough chairs at the table for people to join, for women to join. And I feel more women should come together in helping each other out and forming these coalitions, whether it's a couple or whether it's a broader group as a sisterhood. The bad part of it was, I would say, you felt like an only. There were times where the rest of the class would be like, oh, these people don't matter. they'll go back home, they'll go back to having kids, go back to being housewives. And I'm not trying to trivialize any of these roles. They are all important roles. Again, that should be a choice. That shouldn't be somebody making a comment or choice for us. And there is that bias in that society that I lived in. There was that bias and that kind of a tonality in the conversations.
And speaking of choices, you then made a choice later on to move to the United States. Can you speak a little bit about why you made that choice? Did it have anything to do with the expectations, the experiences you had?
It's a very good question, and I have to reflect on that because I would have said I came because of opportunities. I came to continue to grow, to continue to develop. And that's probably true to some part. I think I would be lying if I didn't acknowledge that I also chose to do it to escape the society I lived in. My one story is I was working for a really good Indian company at that time and working for clients, local clients in Chennai. And one of the things we used to do for them was at the end of every quarter, they used to have a big event. It was like closing out their books, and that needed software support. It sometimes would be tricky, it sometimes would lead to issues. And so they needed us to stay overnight and work through that close and support them through it. I used to raise my hand and do it. Now, obviously, what this then led to was I would work that entire night. I'd go to work during the day and work through the evenings, stay the entire night, help them through the support, and then come back really early in the early morning hours, extremely tired, and have the day off to sleep in. But when I would walk in, now we were living in Chennai, there were 4 of us sharing an apartment. I have had experiences where the secretary of the building or some committee member, like this was a societal building in which we rented an apartment, the committee members would come down and say, what the hell, we don't want such women in our community. And that was a judgment without recognizing, without asking. But to live through that at times is shitty, to use that word. And so a part of my answer to your question, honest part of it would be, yeah, I probably chose to escape that society.
One of the things that I think when we hear those stories, you feel angry, right? It's just, you can be courageous, you can find your strength and fight the battle, but sometimes you just feel like, why? Why do I have to fight this battle all the time? And I think you've taken that anger and you've tried to fuel it in a really positive way in what you do now as a senior partner at McKinsey. Can you talk a little bit about how those experiences have led to the work that you do today, which is really being a leader, I think, in building a community of senior women in technology?
Number one is I feel it's good to be angry because when you are angry, and by the way, I'm not an
angry
I'm
person.
a very smiley person. I'm not genuinely often angry. But I think that indignation is important because then it makes you reflect on how do you channel it?
I
What
agree.
do you do?
Yeah.
And so for me, it starts with that emotion. The second thing, the question you asked is important, which is why should I fight it? And why should I not fight it in some scenarios? That has been an important part of how my own journey has been, asking those whys. And to me, every time I show up to a meeting where I'm not saying something, or every time I see something wrong and I don't speak up, I'm asking myself that question, why? Because I should be doing more in the support of the next generation to come. That's my view. And that's, again, it's not something I'm saying now as a senior partner at McKinsey. I've said this to myself as an associate at McKinsey. I've said this to myself in my previous jobs. So it will not happen, right? Like if we all wait to be somebody big, somebody important, somebody in management to then start this, it will not happen. We each need to do this in our day jobs on day zero that we start our professional careers, and even before and in school. Like I have so many stories of my brother being bullied at school and where I stood up for him. You called it being brave. Being brave is a muscle, and finding that early, finding that often is important. And asking this why question, I think, is also important, because if you don't do it now, if you don't do it when you see something wrong in the service of another person, it will happen again. And you got to decide for yourself, is that morally what you want to stand for? Even if you are not doing something wrong, in future, if it happens again, you would have had a role to play in it.
I always share this story from some of our classrooms. I go into the field, we go into these rural schools, and I speak to the boys and the girls separately. And the most stark kind of reality for me to face is when I walk into a classroom full of girls or a co-ed classroom, the silence is deafening, right? And you're talking about using your voice. And every time I talk to the teachers and I say, why aren't the girls speaking? Do they not know as much? The boys are confident even if they don't know, or if they do know, they're okay to share it. They think their answer is right. And the teachers tell me the girls know it too. They have the same marks. I said, but why aren't they speaking up? So for a girl like that, if you can put yourself in her shoes, what's that step you take to find your voice?
I've been in those shoes. So I've been the one on the quieter side, the one not raising my hand, the one not speaking up. What did change for me is two things. One was the will, right? Like finding the will is important. So I think asking myself, why should I not? What would happen if I did not speak here? What are the consequences? Like, we all as women look dumb, or we all as women look as we don't know the answer in this context, in the example you're giving. But in life, it becomes bigger, right? The company makes wrong decisions, or the company is ill informed, or the client is ill informed of what he needs to know because I didn't say something. But asking yourself the why will give you the will. Like the other question I ask myself is, what's the worst that will happen if I speak up? For women, I feel, and I don't know if this is true of girls too, but like at least for professional women, I feel we keep the bar too high. Every time we speak, we have like, wow, people do say, wow, that was amazing. But at the same time, the bar is so high, then it makes it harder to mentally get there in finding ways to speak up. So those would be my three questions on the skill side. On the will side. On the skill side, I have built, maybe I call it tips for myself. And these are the three simple things in skills that I have built to be able to participate and speak up more easily. One is, if it is appropriate, I try to lead into a conversation. So then I opened it up. If I close the conversation, a meeting, discussion, it by itself gives me a role, which is the easier one to do. If you have that authority, that role, do that. The second would be, ask a question. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Take the question, turn it around, make it a question, ask a question. Right? So question is the second kind of a tactic that I use. And then the third is a synthesis. With all due respect to all the boys and men listening to this podcast, sometimes men talk over each other and they pile on, and then that happens. You've now heard from 3, 4, 5 voices. And there's an opportunity there to jump in and say, okay, let me synthesize across these. These were the two takeaways. So finding tips, finding these I call them micro practices, small things that you all know, that we all have learned, but being able to use them and practicing them enough allows you to build that skill to be able to jump in and have your voice at the table.
It's also role models, right? It's the sisterhood, it's the role models who give you that courage. I think you've talked about how at McKinsey you wouldn't have gotten to where you are today without mentors and allies and supporters and sponsors. So can you speak a little bit about how you found them? Perhaps share one of them who has been really influential for you and what they did?
I love where you went, Vandana. Role models is a big part of growing up. And then growing up as a professional has been way more mentors, sponsors, people who apprentice you, people who teach you. We all didn't get born with like knowing what we know today. We all were born similarly. We learned, we had teachers in our lives, and we need to continue to have teachers in our lives at whatever stage of our careers we are.
So the reason you and I actually got connected is because of Yael Taku.
Yes.
She was the first person I spoke to.
She's lovely.
When we were doing this podcast. And she said, I'm not the right person, but I know who is. And that was you.
Yes.
And how did you actually connect with her, and what role has she played for you in the workplace?
So, Yael is the head of McKinsey in North America. I've known her a long time. She's a huge sponsor. She's a family, is how I describe her. And she is also one of my reasons why I still am at McKinsey. Now, in this example, she was absolutely as well placed, if not better, to have this conversation and be of help to you. She chose to give that opportunity to another person who she thought would also be equally valuable, or maybe a little less valuable, but would be an equally helpful for me in my own professional journey and in my own personal journey, and knowing my passion on helping women and focused on women in tech. So that's the connections she made and decided that let me help sponsor Gayatri in this context.
One of the things that you've spearheaded at McKinsey, you've co-founded, in fact, is the Women in Technology and Operations Conference. What is this? Why was it important to you?
Yeah, so about a decade back, I started this community called Women in Tech. And it's a community of chief information officers, chief digital officers, chief data officers, chief technology officers. So a community of people who are technologists, who have something to do with data, analytics, technology, digital, and are women. And right now, this group consists of the women leaders in North America who come together as this community. And they are a sisterhood, to describe it as that. They support each other. They talk to each other about pertinent topics. They talk to each other about both professional as well as personal development things on their minds. And it's been a huge reason to be for me. It's been my reason to get up in the morning and go to work. It's a platform that I believe has helped many and will continue to help many others to come.
And while you've been doing this, you've also been involved in the company's research on women's advancement in the workplace. So as you've been building this community, you've also been doing this research. What have you learned through both of these that can actually improve the environment, the ecosystem that young people come into?
The not so inspiring message there is it continues to be underrepresented. Women continue to be underrepresented. The progress has been slow, painfully slow over the last decade. My data might be a little outdated, but as of a couple of years back, if we made progress at the exact same rate, it would take over 100+ years for us to get to parity. That's the not so inspiring message. The inspiring parts of it is we saw power in numbers. So we saw data that showed boards that were diverse, boards that had women on them. Those companies did way better than the boards that were unidimensional on sex. Now, while that's true, we also saw data where if it was more than 2 women on that board, they did even better than boards where there were one. And where I'm going with this is there is power in numbers. It's often hard for a solo woman on a panel, on a board, on a committee to make the difference as hard as she tries. It's still important, don't get me wrong. That is better than zero. If organizations and companies made it more 2 or 3 women in that panel, it makes a difference. So for any institutions listening to this podcast, I would encourage them to consider that. For individuals and women listening to this podcast, I would say get involved. It goes back to using our voice. It goes back to influencing using our voice, and it matters. It matters for how we bring about change in this generation. Not wait for another 100 years will be what, like 4 generations beyond us. And I would hate for us to wait that long to change this world.
One of the choices that much earlier than being on a board, being in a C-suite, that we see, one is girls not choosing science at all. But for the students that we work with, they do choose science, but they do not choose math. They choose to pursue medicine, being doctors, because there is a feeling that that is more feminine and more appropriate for a young woman who's good at science to be a doctor than an engineer, right? So boys who are good at science are engineers, girls who are good at science be doctors. How do we actually change that? Because actually what you're talking about, it starts here, right? It starts when they're, much younger also, but even in that simple choice of saying, if I'm good at science, I can see myself as an engineer. I can see that there's so many things I can do with that background. How do we shift that? What does it take?
I wish I knew. I feel like it's a great question and it's a really hard question. I don't know if there is a silver bullet. I will say I smiled as you described this question because to me, math is like awesome.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's choosing to miss out on math, I feel for you guys, like, and gals, like you'll lose out a lot, is how I would say it. But no, jokes aside, look, I think we talked a little bit about don't let others define this for you. Find yourself. Engineering is math when it's being taught, but is not as much math when it's being applied, right? It's a lot of coding, it's a lot of pattern matching, it's a lot of problem solving, it's a lot of design thinking, which is arts, to define it that way. Like human-centered design is a big part of how software and technology is being built. Product management is a big part of how companies like Google and Microsoft and name any company of choice is building out products. That has got nothing to do with math in many ways. It's problem solving, it's structuring, it's using design, and it's using product concepts. So don't close out all those routes that are so exciting. And by the way, it's the future as I see where we are headed over the next at least 10 to 20 years is going to be, if you have AI skills, if you have data skills, if you have product skills, if you have technology skills, that's gonna be the world. So don't lose out on all those options, especially if you have the interest and aptitude just because it feels non-feminine or just because you don't like math as much. You'll figure out how to like math for a couple of years, and then beyond that, like I said, it's not as much math, it's more application of engineering.
And I think you're the one who said there's no reason women can't be at the forefront of the sector that's changing the world.
I agree.
You agree with yourself. You said it.
I'm going to say it again. Like, technology will be the future. Pick any industry, pick any sector. Technology will be the future for the next at least 20 years. I can't predict longer than that, but it likely will be for the next century. So don't sit it out. You need to be involved. You need to be included. You need to be at it to make a difference.
Beautiful. Such a privilege to speak to you, Gayatri. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your honesty.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, a privilege. And I hope very many more people will join and be a part of this STEM revolution that we are driving.
Gayatri, we have a question for you from one of our students. Her name is Bhumika. She's 14 years old, and she studies at a school in Bangalore. She aspires to become a chartered accountant or a CEO. She's asking, what inspired you to become a champion for women in leadership and technology? What advice would you like to give young women who are interested in technology and operations?
So, Bhumika, first of all, thank you for your question and best of luck. I hope you either become a chartered accountant or a CEO, or maybe both. They are not exclusive. In terms of what inspired me to focus on women in STEM, it is to have more people like yourselves be successful, be involved, be engaged. I've had that privilege with the support of my family, and I would love to see more people have that with the little engagement I can provide. So, hope that answers your question.
Thanks so much to Gayatri for being on the show. If you enjoyed that episode, do tune in every week as we sit down with more remarkable women. The podcast is hosted by Avanti Fellows, a nonprofit that breaks the cycle of poverty in India by providing access to post-secondary education for students from underserved communities. With this show, We aim to inspire thousands of young people with these real-life stories of incredible female leaders who have made a lasting impact on their industries. To learn more about the work we do, visit www.avantifellows.org.